Hello and welcome. It is Saturday, October 31st, 2020, and this is Truly News. I am your host, Jason Van Sickle. As always, we start our podcast with a quick rundown of the top headlines from the nation's largest newspapers. And from USA Today, in Pennsylvania, a swing state, black voters could decide the outcome. Based on social, civil rights, and COVID concerns, more black voters are expected to vote in this election. From the Wall Street Journal, despite new treatments for COVID that shorten hospitalizations, as cases rise across the country, hospitals are concerned about their ability to handle increasing numbers. From the New York Times, in the final days, Biden and Trump are focusing their attention on northern states like Michigan, Pennsylvania, and Wisconsin, which are critical to winning the election. From the Los Angeles Times, based on a lawsuit, new data shows more than 25,000 migrant children have been detained in the U.S. for over 100 days, 1,000 for more than a year, and several for more than 5 years. And from the Washington Post, with the election only days away, Republicans are shifting their strategy from challenging voting rules to filing legal cases that question the validity of individual ballots. And here are the stories that are crossing the wire from Reuters News. On Friday, the United States set a new one-day record for COVID cases with over 100,000 new infections being recorded in a 24-hour period. And also from Reuters, as the candidates make their final pitch to voters, Trump is accusing doctors of profiting from COVID deaths, while Biden says that Trump has given up on the pandemic. And those are your top headlines for today. Now, here is our announcer, Ron Johnson, with a word from today's sponsor.
Today's sponsor is Generation Z Clothing with their new Imitation Worker fashion line. Have you never worked a day of manual labor in your life, but want to look cool wearing a blue-collar outfit that says, "I am responsible"? Or do you simply want to fit in with those people wearing the newest trend in safety orange colored outerwear? If so, then try Imitation Worker Fashions, and at least you can look like you work. Thank you to Generation Z Clothing for today's sponsorship.
Thank you, Ron. And now we return to today's news. In science news, from the National Science Foundation, scientists that study winged insects have determined the physical and chemical properties that make up a cicada wing's waterproofing and prevent bacteria from forming on its surface. Now, researchers have replicated the nanoscopic structures using a nanoprinting process which could help create advanced new waterproofing materials. In technology news, from the BBC, the tech giants Amazon, Facebook, Apple, and Google reported third quarter earnings this week, and all showed growth with little signs of slowing. Amazon came out on top as it continued to see impressive growth from increased product and food orders due to COVID. Apple was the lagger with concerns about the future sales of its new iPhone 12. In space news, from U.S. News and World Report, after successfully touching down on the asteroid Bennu, 200 million miles from Earth last week, the unmanned spacecraft OSIRIS-REx collected samples from the asteroid. Originally, some sample pieces clogged the suction arm and started leaking back into space, but the samples are now secured and ready for the long journey back to Earth. And that is your science, technology, and space news for today. Now, we take a break from the headlines and lighten the mood with our fake or maybe true headlines of the day, presented by my friend Billy Cunningham. Billy is a comedian that goes by the stage name Potbelly. And here's Billy.
Thank you and welcome. This is Billy Potbelly Cunningham with today's headline. And here we go. Today's headline is: a baseball player was criticized for exposing his team to COVID. He was taken out of the final World Series game after testing positive. However, when his team won, he ran on to the field, hugging his teammates and posing for pictures. Later, he said, quote, "I thought that I tested positive for all the Corona beers I drank last night. I drank a lot, and I didn't feel good, so I thought that's why they took me out of the game. I don't understand all this other stuff." Yeah, you silly little overly bearded baseball man. Oh, man. Well, that is your headline, and you decide whether you think it is fake or true. Until next time, be kind to others, be good to yourself, and keep on smiling. This is Billy Potbelly Cunningham. Over and out.
Thanks, Billy. And now we return to our review of the day's news. In health news, from MIT Technology Review, even though dining out can be very risky during COVID, there are steps you can follow to reduce the risk. The key is understanding the science and the fact that small, exhaled, virus-containing water vapors hang in the air and float like smoke. So, eat outside, sit 6 feet or more from other diners, and make sure that your server is wearing a mask. In social news, from the New York Times, the power of the tribe still affects humans. The people we seek out and want to know is influenced by our sense of a collective or shared identity. A sense of tribe existed in people long before humans evolved personal identities and a desire for independence, and it is still what we learn first as children before we develop our own sense of self. To read more about this article or to find out more about any article mentioned in this podcast, check out our new Truly News print edition, which is available at trulynews.org. In environmental news, from Science Magazine, over the last 6 years, researchers have been deploying a fleet of over 150 probes to monitor the impact of global warming on microscopic ocean life. In the Southern Sea, drifting ocean floats are being deployed that will monitor the vast amount of tiny plankton, algae, bacteria, and photocellular creatures that live in the ocean. And that is your health, social, and environmental news for today. Now it is time for our Words of Wisdom with philosophy professor Dr. Albert Feinstein. And here is Dr. Feinstein.
Thank you and welcome. Today's words of wisdom come from the ancient Greek philosopher and playwright Sophocles, who said, "Wisdom is the supreme part of happiness." Here, Sophocles is pointing out that ignorance is not bliss. People who are ignorant lack the ability to understand life and find a path that leads to success. That causes disappointment and unhappiness. However, those who seek knowledge, insight, and wisdom begin to see the truth about the world which allows them to successfully navigate life. That is why it is important to constantly seek out knowledge, insight, and wisdom. And those are your words of wisdom for today. Until next time, keep seeking wisdom and believing in your incredible potential. Good luck.
Thank you, Dr. Feinstein. We appreciate your words of wisdom and your encouragement. Now we return to our review of the day's news. In economic news, from the Wall Street Journal, boosted in part by the remaining pandemic aid being distributed by Congress, household spending rose by 1.4% in September. That is the fifth consecutive month of increased consumer spending. Personal income was also up slightly after a sharp decline in August. These are good, but not overwhelmingly positive, signs for the economy. And in world news, from the BBC, a strong earthquake in the Aegean Sea shook Greece and Turkey yesterday, causing some buildings to collapse. No fatalities were reported, but Turkish officials said that 6 buildings had collapsed in the city of Izmir, which is a coastal city near the epicenter of the quake. Both Greece and Turkey sit on fault lines, and earthquakes are common. And that is your economic and world news for today. In entertainment news, we start with new movies, and today's movie is The Wolf of Snow Hollow, starring Jim Cummings, Ricky Lindholm, and Robert Forster. This movie falls in the categories of comedy, horror, and thriller. And here is the description from IMDb. Terror grips a small town as bodies are discovered after each full moon. As he tries to solve the case, Officer Marshall struggles to remind himself there's no such thing as werewolves. The Wolf of Snow Hollow is now for rent on YouTube. Moving on, in newly released shows, today's show is Judgment with Ashley Banfield, starring Ashley Banfield. This series falls under the category of reality TV, and here is the description from IMDb. This series is a deep dive into the most provocative and talked about trials and cases of all time. Judgment with Ashley Banfield is now showing on Pluto TV. Finally, in our entertainment news, we look at newly published books. And our book for today is Anxious People by Fredrik Backman. This book is presently number 5 on the New York Times nonfiction bestseller list, and here is a summary from Amazon. From the best-selling author of A Man Called Ove comes a charming novel about a crime that never took place, a would-be robber who disappears, and 8 extremely anxious strangers. Anxious People is now available at your local bookstore and in print, audiobook, and Kindle formats on Amazon. And that is your entertainment news for today. As always, we end our broadcast with Hope for Humanity, stories about the goodness and kindness that people show each other every day. And here is today's story. From Dickerson, North Dakota, a reader wrote about someone who brightened her day with a helping hand and a constant smile. The farmers in Dickinson know Tyler as the young man who shows up to fix their farming equipment when it breaks, and he always does so with a smile. That attitude is greatly appreciated, especially since Tyler meets farmers at their most frustrating moments. One person said that she couldn't remember what he had fixed, but months later she could still remember his smile. It's a small way that Tyler shows kindness while simply doing his job. And that is your news for October 31st, 2020. Have a wonderful day.